Hey everyone, welcome to the first class in the human body, health, and disease. We're going to start off by talking about circulation, in particular the circulation of blood through your body, all the hoses and tubes that deliver blood around your body. Typically, this is talked about as part of a cardiovascular system, cardio meaning heart, and vascular meaning all those tubes and hoses that deliver blood. We're going to separate that out. We will talk about the heart, so don't worry, those of you who really want to learn something about the heart. We're going to cover that, but we're going to begin by talking about the vascular system. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. First, you got to start somewhere, so we might as well start here. The second reason is that this class you're going to find is going to kind of default back often to a central theme, which is that all the parts of your body are connected together. That is, we're going to study the kidneys, we'll study the liver, we're going to talk about the nerves, we're going to talk about whatever, the gastrointestinal system, the heart, but we're going to see by the end that they are all interconnected in a lot of complex and really elegant and interesting ways. And so I like starting with the circulatory system because that allows us to see some of those connections. Because the reality is your toes, your fingers, your brain, your liver, your kidney, all of these are connected together by this circulatory system. All of them are dependent on the delivery of blood, or what we call perfusion. That is to say, the adequate delivery of blood to all the organs and tissues in your body is called medically perfusion, and in particular, the delivery of the things that blood provides, that we're going to talk about, like nutrition, oxygen, and things like that. So that's our starting point. The circulatory system seems fairly complex, and if you look at an image of it, like this one, what you're going to see is that there's a lot of hoses and tubes that connect all parts of your body. In fact, there's probably a lot more than you realize. We're going to break it down a little bit into the different kinds of tubes, if you will, and their different functions. And then we're going to look at how that connects later with the lungs and the bones. And I know that seems weird, the bones, but realize that while a lot of people mistakenly think that bones are just sort of inert structures, the reality is they are living tissue and they are intimately involved in the circulation process. And we'll talk a little about the gastrointestinal system a little bit too. So we're going to kind of talk about some different systems, but not in depth. First, because it's an introductory class, but also because we're going to get to that later as we start exploring each of these parts and seeing how they're connected together. So the circulatory system really has several functions to it, and that's where I kind of want to begin. I want to begin with what's the point of circulation, because you probably all know intuitively you need blood. And you probably also know that if you don't have blood to a particular part of your body, it's going to stop working properly. But what is it actually doing? Why is blood actually necessary? And it's not just one answer, so I want to talk about the different purposes of blood. What we're going to talk about is this. Blood first delivers oxygen, and that's key. Second, it delivers energy that allows your cells to function. So already this makes sense, right? Because whether we're talking about muscle tissue or kidney tissue or whatever, you can presume that it needs oxygen and then it needs some form of energy. It is doing stuff, it's building stuff, right? Your muscles are regenerating themselves and growing and building. Your kidneys are too. Your liver is as well. Your gastrointestinal system is working hard digesting food. It needs energy. Blood provides that energy. In addition to that, blood does something else that people often don't think about. It takes away the waste. It takes away byproducts of metabolic functions. What that means is, as you produce energy, there's some stuff that's generated you don't need, and that has to be taken away. And the blood does that as well. And that includes carbon dioxide, and I'll talk about why, but it also includes other products of metabolic function, like acids or lactate or bits and pieces of cells or other debris that's just part of your natural redevelopment and deterioration of body cells. What I mean is constantly your body is both making cells and cells are breaking apart. And so those cells that break apart leave little bits and pieces or whatever, bits of protein or proteins that are what we'd say denatured. They aren't functioning properly anymore for some reason. All of that needs to be removed as well. And your blood is key to that process of removing those things. So let's begin with that first step, which is delivering oxygen. It would be reasonable at this point for you to ask the question, why do we need oxygen? Let me answer that question in real simple terms. In this class, often, I'm going to take things that are pretty complex and I'm going to break them down to kind of the simple fundamental terms, because the point of this class is not to train you to be a doctor or a nurse. The point of this class is to train you to be an intelligent human being that knows how your body functions. This class is a user's guide to the human body, right? And in part, this class is meant to prepare you so that when your doctor gives you some advice, you'll understand what the hell that advice means. So we're going to keep things as simple as we can. So in very simple terms, what's happening throughout your body is you are using some kind of carbon-based molecule. So we're going to write that down in simple terms as C. Now, it could be a complex molecule, it could be a simple molecule, but we're just going to say carbon-based molecule because fundamentally it's carbon. That gets combined with oxygen. And I'm writing oxygen down as O2 because oxygen likes to hang out in pairs. So if you have one atom of oxygen, it's unstable and it's looking for something to pair with. If you have two atoms of oxygen connected together, O2, then it's more stable. So the oxygen in the air is O2. So we're combining carbon and oxygen, and what we get as a result of that is carbon dioxide, a combination of carbon and oxygen. It couldn't be really simpler than that. Now, that is a pretty common way for nature and for you to generate and use energy. So in your car, you're putting in gasoline. And what that's actually doing is taking a carbon-based molecule. In that case, it's a molecule that has 8 carbon all lined up and 18 hydrogen atoms connected around it. That's one of the molecules that's in gasoline. So we're taking a more complex carbon-based molecule, we combine it with oxygen, and we get out of that carbon dioxide and energy. So my formula really isn't quite complete because what I should have is we produce carbon dioxide and energy. When you are burning wood in a fireplace, that's a carbon-based molecule, wood, much more complex than just C, but it's still carbon-based. We combine it with oxygen, and what do we get out of that? Carbon dioxide that goes out your chimney, and energy. And the energy is heat energy that warms your house. So fundamentally, that's what's happening throughout your body. That's what your muscle tissue and your organs are doing. It's more complex. There's more steps to it. If you're going to be a doctor, you're going to have to learn all those steps. But for right now, that's the basics of it. And these basics already tell us something really important, which is if this is going to happen, we're going to need oxygen. You can't start a fire without oxygen. You're not starting a fire, but you get the idea. To produce and use the energy necessary to rebuild cells, to complete metabolic functions, we need oxygen. So how do we bring that oxygen? Well, it ain't that easy. What I mean is, we need a lot of oxygen. I just told you, all your muscle tissue, from your fingers to your toes, your brain needs a lot of oxygen, your kidneys, your liver, your spleen, well, whatever. Every body part, you get the idea, needs oxygen. That's a lot of oxygen. So we could imagine that we're just going to dissolve oxygen in the blood and just have little bits of oxygen in the blood because oxygen dissolves in liquids. We have oxygen in water. That's how fish survive, right? Fish take in the water and they pull out what's called the dissolved oxygen. So we could just dissolve oxygen in the blood, but it wouldn't be nearly enough. I mean, we do that, by the way. There is dissolved oxygen in your blood, but it's not nearly enough. It's like 5% of what you'd need for all your metabolic functions. So not nearly enough. We need a better way of delivering oxygen. And in order to deal with that, we got red blood cells. Red blood cells are fantastic. They're really freaking cool. They're also called erythrocytes. And erythrocyte just means red blood cell, so it has the same meaning. And it ends in cyte. And what you're going to notice in medicine and in this class is that cells often end in cyte. So if you have a word that's blah, 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 cyte, whatever else it is, it's probably a cell. So in this case, erythrocyte is just a red blood cell. And red blood cells are kind of cool. They're shaped like a jelly donut if you sucked the jelly out of it. So it kind of got flat in the middle. We call that a biconcave disc. And you can see from this image sort of what I mean by that shape. And that's not by accident, actually. That is very functional in that it provides a lot of surface area to the red blood cell. Because what we're going to learn is that the red blood cell is going to store oxygen, and that means it needs to be able to exchange oxygen with its surrounding environment. In other words, it needs to be able to absorb oxygen, and it needs to be able to release oxygen. So the more surface area it has for its mass, the better able it is to exchange and release oxygen. And that biconcave disc shape gives it that opportunity. So already this is interesting. But the real interesting part is how it carries oxygen. In the red blood cells is something called hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is a molecule that has in it iron. And iron in the hemoglobin allows the hemoglobin to carry oxygen. More specifically, each molecule of hemoglobin can carry 4 atoms of oxygen. You might say, 4 atoms of oxygen? That ain't a lot of oxygen, I'll say. You told us the body needed a lot of oxygen, and I'm not impressed with the number 4. Okay, but does this impress you? Each cell, each red blood cell, has about 250 to 270 million hemoglobin molecules in it. That's a lot of hemoglobin. And so each cell is carrying a significant number, literally hundreds of millions of atoms of oxygen. And this allows us to pack a lot more oxygen in the blood than it would otherwise be possible. And that way you've got blood, which you've got a lot of blood, but not a huge amount. But the blood is able to carry all this oxygen to all the parts of your body, which is sort of amazing, right? So that's the key to red blood cells. We're going to talk more about red blood cells later, but for now, that's sort of the basics that we need to know. Red blood cells are carrying oxygen, and they're doing this with hemoglobin. There are hundreds of millions of hemoglobin molecules in each red blood cell, and therefore there are billions and billions of oxygen molecules, atoms, being carried in your blood. We'll talk later about how those oxygen molecules got there. Okay, the other thing that's going to need to happen here is we're going to need to remove carbon dioxide. Formula is right there, and it says the product is carbon dioxide. We don't want that carbon dioxide to stay in your body, principally because carbon dioxide can mix with water and create an acid. So we're going to need to get rid of that carbon dioxide. Now, the question is, how do we carry the carbon dioxide out? I'll get to the acid part in a minute. Same problem, right? Like, we could dissolve carbon dioxide in blood. And by the way, carbon dioxide does dissolve more readily in a fluid. So this is the reason, for example, that we can add carbon dioxide to Coke and have it fizzy. And you can open a Coke, forget about it, you've probably done this, and the next morning, that can of Coke, pour it down the sink, and it's all fizzy. There's still carbon dioxide in it. So carbon dioxide dissolves more readily in a fluid than oxygen does. So it's a little more promising. So we could probably carry like 7 or 8% of the carbon dioxide we generate out of the body by dissolving it in the blood. And we do. But that's not enough. Like leaving 93% of the carbon dioxide there to form an acid in your tissues, not going to make you happy. So most of that is carried out by bicarbonate. Now, to explain that a little bit, I'm going to have to talk about acids and bases, and I will do that in a second. But don't be freaked out by the idea of bicarbonate. More strictly, it's a bicarbonate ion. So it's a charged particle that's bicarbonate. So it'd be HCO3 negative. I'll go ahead and write it down. If you don't care, don't worry about it. I'm never going to quiz you or test you on this, but it's kind of interesting. It's HCO3, and it's got a slight negative charge to it. It's got an extra electron in there. Okay, that is going to carry out the carbon dioxide. And the nice thing is that will carry it out, neutralize it, what we call a buffer. So it's going to absorb the extra carbon dioxide, hold it in place, stabilize it so that it doesn't become too acidic, carry it out to your lungs, and you're going to breathe it out. So notice already, this makes sense of something that probably you hadn't asked before, but it's kind of interesting. You breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. Why? This is why. You're breathing in the oxygen to oxygenate the hemoglobin so you can carry it to all the parts of your body. You then take the carbon dioxide and bring it out of the body and expire it. You breathe out carbon dioxide, and that's the carbon dioxide. That's, if you'd like, the metabolic waste or the metabolic byproduct of generating energy for cell growth and other metabolic functions. So that carrying of bicarbonate handles about 70% of the carbon dioxide we produce. Another 20% or so actually happens in the hemoglobin. So it turns out the hemoglobin, in a very different way, can also carry carbon dioxide. So the hemoglobin carries about 20-ish% of the carbon dioxide, and about 10%, a little less than 10% probably, is carried by being dissolved in the blood. Do you need to memorize these numbers? Nah, but get a general idea and certainly know that most carbon dioxide is carried out by bicarbonate. And bicarbonate you're familiar with. You ever seen baking soda before? That's sodium bicarbonate. That's just bicarbonate with sodium in it. Kind of the same thing, right? So don't be intimidated by the science here. Okay, this gets us to the key question. What is acid? Like, why do I not want acid? Intuitively, you know, acid bad. Like, pour acid on my skin, it burns. Pour acid on the table, it makes a hole. So I definitely don't want acid in my kidneys. I definitely don't want acid in my muscle tissue, etc., right? Okay, so far fair. But what is acid? Well, acid is really just anything that releases hydrogen ion, so a reactive hydrogen, when it's dissolved in water. That's what an acid is. But that makes it reactive. So when you pour an acid on a table and it burns a hole through the table, that's a pretty powerful acid. It's just reacting with. It's changing the chemical composition of whatever the table's made out of, wood or whatever. And so it is basically then dissolving the table or changing its composition to a different chemical composition because it's reacting with it. So it's really just a reactive chemical. Generally, our body likes a very specific level of acidity. We measure acidity on a scale like this one. And that scale has 7 in the middle. Ever seen the shampoo commercials where they say our shampoo is pH neutral? What they mean is it's got a pH right around 7, because 7 means that it's not reactive. It's not on either side of the scale. On one side of the scale, things are acid. Those are the numbers lower than 7. On the other side of the scale, things are alkaline, or sometimes called basic. And that's the opposite of acidity. And when those two combine together, they react aggressively together because they both got complementary reactive characteristics to them. And at some point in middle school, you did this maybe. You mixed vinegar with baking soda and it foamed up. Baking soda is alkaline, vinegar is acidic. You mix the two together, it gets reactive. That's awesome for your little volcano in 7th grade, not so awesome for your muscle tissue. So we really don't want acid to build up in our tissue, which is why we remove the carbon dioxide. If we don't remove the carbon dioxide, or for some reason our body doesn't function properly, so the carbon dioxide isn't being removed quickly enough, what we get is acidosis, too much acid. On the other hand, if we remove too much carbon dioxide so that things start getting alkaline, we get alkalosis. Things are a little too alkaline, right? Our body likes to be at 7.4 in the scale, so a little bit on the alkaline side, but pretty close to neutral. And our body is really sensitive to that because that pH is setting the conditions for rebuilding cells and all kinds of other metabolic functions, that define homeostasis. We'll hear that term a lot in this class. Homeostasis, homeo means the same, stasis means status. So homeostasis just means keeping things stable. So when we're talking about metabolic functions and health, etc., We're talking about our body trying to maintain a stable environment, homeostasis. And it does that best at 7.4 on the pH scale. So much so that if we get to like 7.3, that's bad. If we get to 7.2, that's really bad. You're acidotic. You're very acidotic, and that's a problem. If we get below 7, crap. Your patient's in bad shape, right? On the other hand, if we get up to like 7.45, we're concerned. 7.5, 7.6, we're very concerned. So we need to be really close to 7.4. In fact, 7.35 to 7.45 is our acceptable range. What's outside that range? All kinds of things in different parts of our body. Like, I don't know, lemon juice is about 2, 2.5. On the other hand, a drain cleaner might be like 12 or 13 because a drain cleaner is alkaline or basic and lemon juice is acidic, as you know, right? The acids in your stomach are probably right around 1, so they're really acidic. And there's not much in your body that is on the other side as alkalytic, but there's like, bicarbonates in your body, and those are alkaline. That's why they combine with the carbon dioxide to carry it out. So that's the basics of pH. What's the H stand for in pH? Hydrogen, because we're talking about free hydrogen ions. Those are the things that react and create those potentially adverse reactions, right? So that's what we're paying attention to. So we're going to be talking about pH now and then, and I'll explain it as we go through it. So if it isn't super comfortable for you now, that's okay. Just know that the body wants to be pretty close to neutral, which is 7, at 7.4. And below that's bad, and above that's bad, and we don't tolerate much of a range. Before I leave the idea of the pH scale, I should point out that it's logarithmic. That's a fancy way of saying that it's a really big scale that we've shrunk into a smaller scale. So, for example, 1 is 10 times more acidic than 2. 6 is 10 times more acidic than 7. So with each jump in a whole number, you get a 10-time change. So if you go from 3 to 1, that's 100 times more acidic. Now you can kind of see what I mean when you're talking about something like stomach acid that's a pH of 1. That's really acidic, right? Because it is like 10,000 times more acidic, more than that actually, than neutral. So that's high level of acidity. Why would we want that in our stomach? We'll talk about that. But the short answer is because we're eating all kinds of things and we need to break those apart into their small component parts so that we can absorb all the nutrients from them. And the initial part of that process is using acid to break it apart. Okay. So far we've talked about delivering oxygen, taking away carbon dioxide. What else does blood do? It delivers energy. And that specific form of energy is a sugar. Now there's all kinds of sugars. There's maltose, there's fructose, there's glucose, and the one you've heard of is sucrose. So here's the thing. Sucrose isn't actually a specific type of sugar. It's a mixture of glucose and fructose. So the basic 3 are maltose, fructose, and glucose. And the one that our body uses is glucose. So one of the things that our circulatory system does is it delivers glucose to all the parts of the body. That's the C. So I talked about a carbon-based molecule. Remember, I promised you it wasn't just going to be carbon, it was going to be a carbon-based molecule. Do you know what glucose is? C6H12O6. I'm going to write it down because why not? C6H12O6. That is glucose. So our body is going to take food, it's going to expose it to an acid in our stomach. We'll get to the details about that later. It's going to break it down to its component parts. It's going to pull out some of the energy, and it's going to change that energy to glucose. And it's going to deliver that glucose, that fundamental sugar, to all the parts of our body so that all the parts of the body can use that glucose, that carbon-based molecule, oxygenate it, and extract from that the energy it needs to maintain homeostasis. That's our circulatory system so far. What's it look like, C6H12? Imagine, it's kind of, this isn't exactly right, but let's make it simple. a row of 6 carbon atoms, hydrogen and oxygen coupled around it in different ways. I'll provide a picture, should be a picture there now for you, of basically kind of what it looks like. When we have too much glucose in our body, we say we're hyperglycemic. Hyper meaning high, glycemic is sugar. When we say we have too little, we're hypo. Hypo means lower, and glycemic, hypoglycemic. You've experienced both of these. At some point you sat down, ate a big ass piece of chocolate cake, way more than you should have, and you were like, oh, that's really good cake. You had a lot of sugar in your body. You're feeling like that energy, right? And all that sugar was surging around, and frankly, it was more than you could use, so some of it got stored as fat. But you were hyperglycemic for a little bit. Not super hyperglycemic, but you had a high blood sugar, high amount of sugar in your blood. And then there was some day where you skipped breakfast and maybe skipped lunch and went like 12, 14 hours without eating. And then your heart started pounding and you had a headache and you're like, shit, I better get something to eat. Hypoglycemic. And your body doesn't tolerate that very well either, because now you don't have enough sugar. So what are your cells doing? They're like, send us energy. We're trying to rebuild cells here. We're trying to keep your body going. We're trying to maintain homeostasis. We need energy. Now, all the parts of your body are probably suffering, but the part you noticed was the headache, because that's the part you're going to feel first. So maybe you had trouble concentrating. In other words, if your brain isn't getting enough energy, you're going to notice that first. It's not like your toes weren't also getting enough energy. They also needed more energy, but you're not going to notice it in your toes. But if your brain's not working properly and you have trouble concentrating, trouble focusing, a headache, you're going to notice that. So that was probably your sign that you needed to finally eat some food after going too long without eating. That's hypoglycemia. There are other things that your body's blood circulation is going to do, like, for example, removing metabolic products. So that could be lactate, that could be broken cell pieces, that could be denatured proteins, which are proteins that are no longer functioning anymore. All that's going to be carried away. We're going to talk about that later. And in the same way, we're also going to see the blood deliver a very valuable product, which is defensive cells. So you might have heard of these before, things like B cells and T cells and other kinds of things. We'll talk about these, but basically different kinds of products that our body uses to defend us against infection. And your circulatory system is going to provide that material. That's interesting. So, as my projector goes nuts here, I'm going to end it for this presentation. We're going to pick it up with the next presentation, basically on what the hose and tubes look like, how they come together. So if you'd like, the mechanical systems that define the circulatory pathways through your body.